This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of When Science Speaks. I am Mark Bayer, and this episode is being brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting, a unique advocacy and training firm in the Washington, D.C. area that helps scientists and engineers gain influence, build relationships, and get funding with the stakeholders that matter most. I am so glad that we're able to have Nathaniel Brooks Horwitz on the show today. Nathaniel has a rare set of experiences, particularly for someone still in the early stage of his journey. And I'm excited to have him share details, advice, and lessons that I really think are going to be applicable and interesting to you all. Nathaniel's passion is to develop new medicines. He's a venture associate at RA Capital, a leading biotech venture capital firm in Boston, and board observer for Quench Bio, Clear Creek Bio, Nivien Therapeutics, and others. He was previously founding CEO of Nivien Therapeutics. Nathaniel's writing is published in the Washington Post, New York Times, The Atlantic, Boston Globe, and Financial Review, with his work featured in Cell, Nature, Science, Translational Medicine, and Forbes. Welcome to the show, Nathaniel. So great to have you here.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
You know, scientists and engineers, as you know, often are advised to use storytelling as a key element of their description of their research and focus. You have such a compelling story, and I know it would just be really interesting for listeners to hear about it. You know, how you proceeded from research at Harvard through founding your company and dealing with the crosscurrents you describe in that excellent Washington Post op-ed that you wrote and that we'll link to in the show notes, and then moving to your current role after graduating from Harvard in 2018.
So my journey in biotechnology and bioentrepreneurship began when I came to Harvard to study molecular biology. Pretty clear focus on human health and well-being and the ways that new scientific technologies can enable improvements in those areas. I started off doing bench research in the lab of a professor named Chad Cowan, where we were working on elucidating the mechanism by which a novel drug target might be relevant in cardiovascular disease. And that work was finally published just last winter, 5 years later. During that time, I was exploring the ways in which science done in labs like Professor Cowan's becomes actual biotechnology, therapeutics, medical devices, diagnostics, things that can really help people. And during that time, I was looking at the places within our system in which that transition from science to technology takes place. And I honed in on venture capital as a way that one can use new companies as engines to drive biomedical innovation. And that led me to intern at RA Capital as an undergraduate, and ultimately led me to the path of starting a company while I was still in college. I was looking at interesting new research that was coming out, applying some of the skills and knowledge that I'd picked up from the team at RA, and ended up partnering both with a classmate at Harvard as well as the chair of the systems biology department at Harvard Medical School around some really interesting research that he had done on a novel signaling pathway, a biochemical system in cells that cancer uses to defend itself from existing treatments, and especially the hard-to-treat cancers like pancreatic and ovarian. So we, based on the science by our scientific co-founder at Harvard, raised venture capital to develop a therapeutic targeting this pathway, which is called Hippo-YAP. We partnered with a contract research lab that really drove some of our early experiments. We hired scientists out of academia and industry to support our efforts. We opened a lab in San Francisco and ended up partnering with both academic institutions, biotech startups, and collaborating with a pharmaceutical company, all aimed at developing these molecules that would target this pathway and, we hoped, enable more effective treatments for cancer. Unfortunately, especially given the difficulty of the cancers that we were pursuing, we didn't succeed. The chemistry went quite well. We were able to develop molecules that we've since patented that inhibit the signaling pathway, but we weren't able to convert those into preclinical data that would really compel one to continue development and take this into clinical trials. So we wound down the company. I had left my undergraduate degree in order to work on Nivien full time. And so I went back and finished that degree at Harvard, wrote the Washington Post op-ed about some of the themes and insights that I'd gleaned from that experience, and then started working at RA Capital almost a year ago now, last June.
Let me ask you, this is really, really interesting as you concisely explain this, Nathaniel. I noted in the intro about your passion for developing new medicines, and I'm wondering what fuels that passion. Are there particular experiences, maybe professional, educational, or personal, that triggered it?
So I think the earliest thing that I can point to, as is the case with many people who work in the biomedical industry, is an early encounter with disease. And that was in the case of my mom, who, when I was 8, was diagnosed with invasive breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, she came out on the other side. She's now been cancer-free for almost 15 years. But at the time, it was pretty harrowing. She had chemotherapy and radiation and surgery. And it was a really early window into the biomedical realm, the idea of what is cancer in the first place, how does it work, and how do we beat it? Then, of course, I had other encounters with healthcare and the ways that health can go wrong. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. She lived with us for a few years when I was in middle school and high school. And that really drove my interest in an early look at neurodegenerative diseases. So I was already inclined towards the biological sciences in high school. And that's when CRISPR was published, the first paper out of Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier's lab at UC Berkeley. And like many who read that initial paper and the resulting coverage, I thought that this looked like a foundationally new technology. And I had a great high school biology teacher. I went to a local public high school, and we didn't have the greatest resources in terms of some of the fancy labs that I later had access to at Harvard, or that peers might have had access to at boarding schools. But she really enabled me to spend entire semesters with a block of my class schedule on independent studies, where I looked at the ways that CRISPR technology could be applied and how it could be used and delivered. I looked at Alzheimer's disease in a separate study based on my grandmother's experience. I even looked at potential treatments to the common cold, which I think is strangely relevant now in that many types of the common cold are caused by coronavirus. And all these experiences led me to then, when I was deciding what I wanted to study, to pursue molecular biology. It was a brief after freshman year where I took, having studied it for a few years now, fairly advanced classes in molecular biology. I was sidetracked a little into philosophy and some of the more fundamental questions around why any of this is the case, why the world is the way that it is, given that it is how one should live, and some of those existential questions. So I actually declared as a philosophy major my sophomore fall, when Harvard students pick their concentration. Ultimately, I returned to molecular biology because I realized that a lot of those questions in philosophy can't be answered with tools that exist today. But when thinking about how one lives a good life, I looked back on the work that I'd already been doing in biology and biotech, and thought, if you spend a life trying to develop new therapies or medical devices or diagnostics that really help people, it's hard to go wrong. So that was another component. And then once I think someone begins working in this field, it's just fascinating. And you see the ways in which it can help people, and you meet folks who have been in the industry for decades and see the great lives that they've lived working in this industry and this space. And so it becomes, at that point, a self-reinforcing cycle. And that's why I'm probably going to spend the rest of my life in the biological sciences.
I love how you added the philosophical, the philosophy component. I wasn't actually aware of that, and sort of you're answering these existential questions by doing what you're doing. Really, really interesting. You described in your op-ed for the Post, which is really, really excellent. How you made the transition from labs at Harvard to the startup scene, and I'm wondering if you would describe for our listeners, what that transition look like, what may have prepared you for it, what surprised you, what obstacles you confronted, for example, other elements that you think are important, moving from Harvard Square to San Francisco. And it's a major change, of course. And then from an educational setting, even though probably we're spending a lot of time in labs and maybe even interacting with industry folks at Harvard, to, a more corporate type of environment, startup culture in San Francisco.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing I'd say is that Harvard has a very entrepreneurial community and a very entrepreneurial environment. And I'd say that was enriched, that was particularly present in the group of people with whom I spent my time, my best friends, my suite mates and block mates. Actually, in my group of 8, living together starting sophomore year, when one goes from sort of randomly assigned housing mates to choosing a blocking group of up to 8 people who you live with for the rest of college. Out of the 8 of us, 6 started companies, spanning healthcare, education, technology, fashion, in my case, biotechnology, even another who still to this day works on a fintech company in Turkey that he started while we were still in school. So there was a lot of this entrepreneurial vibe in the air. And so, especially after spending a summer as an intern at RA Capital, I was really thinking about the ways in which I might start a company myself and what type of technologies I would want to work in. And in parallel, I was also a partner with a group called Dorm Room Fund, which is the venture arm of the venture capital firm First Round Capital. Mm-hmm. And we were tasked with finding and investing in startups based on university science or started by students at universities. Mm-hmm. So that was another layer of entrepreneurial and venture experience that by the time I actually started my own company, I'd become pretty familiar with the ways in which people did this. In terms of the transition to San Francisco, largely driven by availability of capital, and in particular, an investor who was willing to take a risk on young founding team. While we had a really established scientific co-founder from Harvard, my classmate and I were still undergraduates, which is not the typical phenotype of a founding team, especially a therapeutics company, as well as a venture investor who was willing to provide us with lab space and lab equipment and really take pretty significant costs off our initial budget, which is a very important factor when you're just getting off the ground. So we moved out to San Francisco. We started that lab and hired scientists there.
Great. And, as you were making that transition, you sort of talked about how you were prepared just by being in this sort of entrepreneurship was sort of in the water at Harvard. Were there elements that surprised you as you made the move? It sounded like you were well prepared for it based on the work that you had been doing and the environment you'd been in at Harvard. But, were there elements that surprised you as you were, getting ready and getting everything set up on the West Coast?
Yeah, I'd say I was well prepared as an entrepreneur. I think I went in with the right framework, the right set of experiences to the extent that one can have experience at that age, and in general, the right philosophy behind what we were doing and why we were doing it. What I wasn't prepared for was drug development. We were trying to develop a small molecule therapeutic to treat pancreatic cancer, which has defeated hundreds of companies, research institutes, scientists, doctors, patients. It's been a scourge of humanity for thousands of years, and still remains largely unaddressed. There are challenges that come with that, some of which we knew we were getting into, others that one can never be prepared for. And that really ultimately was probably why we were unsuccessful in creating an effective therapeutic. It's not a mistake that most successful biotech entrepreneurs and company founders have been in the industry for a long time. Drug development is incredibly hard. Success rates in biotechnology startups are much lower than in startups in most other industries where they're already quite low. And I think in particular, when you're a lone young entrepreneur starting a almost garage band lab to get things off the ground, you also don't have some of the added benefits that one has being a company venture capital or spinning a company out as a program from a larger organization where there's already a lot of data and a team in place. So I'd say while I was well prepared to be an entrepreneur, I was not yet prepared to be a drug developer. And that's really the skill set that I aspire to develop now, both having gone through that adventure as well as in my current role and going forward.
Really helpful. It's sometimes in the political realm, it's sort of the best way to get elected to office is to run and lose and then run again. So you learn a lot as part of that experience. And so I want to sort of pick up where you were there about, working on this drug development aspect. And, as I work with scientists, I find, by training, really it's ingrained for them to be cautious and avoid hyping their results. The term the evidence suggests is considered actually quite a strong statement in support of findings, for example, in that setting. But that's a passive voice formulation, and it can lead to disconnects when scientists speak to general audiences of stakeholders, policymakers, for example, who aren't familiar with the native language of science as it's spoken in scientific circles, research circles. And now, you've got this really strong grounding and experience in the science, as you pointed out and explained, and you're moving sort of into a business role to an extent. And so how do you balance that need to remain accurate and faithful to the science while also, trying to provide clear descriptions of the project progress, of your work to investors, for example?
Yeah, no, it's a really hard problem, I think, across all cases of entrepreneurship and raising funding, whether philanthropic or venture capital. Even getting a support for a bill on Capitol Hill, I imagine, involves to some extent selling a dream, when the reality is that there's going to be a really tough road to get there. And people may know that intellectually, but often that can be overpowered by emotional inputs, right? And it's very important to be direct about the realities of what you're trying to do. And in a case like ours, we were trying to develop a novel therapeutic for one of the most difficult diseases in the world. We needed to convince good scientists to leave their respectable jobs in academia and industry in order to join our scrappy little startup. We needed to convince top scientific minds to be the chair and other members of our scientific advisory board, people who have prestigious academic appointments. We had to raise capital from firms that, yes, are professional investors familiar with the idea of making risk-adjusted bets, but who expect to make those bets based on full information. And therefore, you have to be really careful. It's, I think, a thin line between selling a story that is necessary to do in order to get resources behind moonshot projects, but to do so in a way that is fundamentally honest and that has integrity, so that when things go south, as they so often do, and as we saw in our own program, people recognize that was because of the inherent difficulties of the task and the challenges of doing fundamentally novel science, or in other industries, making fundamental innovations. And therefore, while people might be regretful over capital that was lost on an investment, or time that was lost as a founder, or a job that was left in order to pursue this high-risk mission, at least people know that they went in with their eyes wide open, all the facts on the table, and were able to do this all in an understood way. One other point that I raised in the Washington Post piece, which I think is really the core of why this matters in biotech particularly, as opposed to industries where you might be selling a consumer product or enterprise software, is that in biotech, at the end of the day, you're working on therapies and other technologies that are aimed at helping people live. And therefore, there's a significant component of hope. But there's also the risk of false hope. And that was really the core of the Washington Post op-ed, in that the same way that employees want to know what they're getting into when they join a startup, same way investors want to know all the facts when they put their money at risk, patients want to know whether a therapeutic that they're reading about in the press or have seen on a company's website is actually going to help them, or whether it really only has a very slim chance of success and they'll likely never see that therapeutic in use. So that's another really important component when one is working in healthcare, is that overselling becomes riskier than ever, because you're not just risking capital, you're not just risking careers, you're risking the hope that people are living on.
Well, on that point, Nathaniel, I want to thank you personally. In our experience, we lost my father-in-law to pancreatic cancer, and we got a sense, one way that people, in this case, my wife was dealing with the diagnosis, which basically happened this time. It was in April, back in 2014. Was to do a really deep dive into the literature and look for clinical trials and kind of bring to bear her, all of her sort of intelligence and diligence to try to scour everything possible to figure out, was there some sort of novel therapeutic that potentially could help. And on one level, that was really kind of a therapy for her, because it enabled her to feel some sense of control in a environment where, of course, she had zero. Nobody had any kind of control, and we got a little bit of a window into, as you point out, just how vexing this condition is and how resistant it has been to any kind of successful treatment. So thank you for uprooting your life and really focusing like a laser on this problem, because it does affect so many people. I'd love for you, sort of just last sort of question that I have is, so many of our listeners are interested in entrepreneurship and starting companies. They don't really have a good sense. I think your op-ed piece is a great primer for them to understand. And like I said, they'll be accessible on our show notes. But looking at it maybe a little bit higher level, just broad strokes, if you're a PhD or a postdoc or an undergrad, thinking about entrepreneurship generally, what are some of the key success factors, kind of skills and qualities that you view as essential for being a successful entrepreneur, sort of all things, being equal? Of course, there are always elements you can't control, but within the, category of how you could prepare or learn about things that would be quite useful to have in the toolkit, sort of what do you see as tools that belong there?
Definitely. So I'll speak to, just some general qualities that I think might help one across any number of different roles, but especially in entrepreneurship, and then maybe a couple more specific to biotech entrepreneurship in particular. It definitely requires a high degree of hard work. I think entrepreneurship is not something where you clock in 9 to 5 or even an 8 to 8. You're working constantly throughout the period in which you're building a company. And that's something people need to be prepared for and had the experience and fortitude to do before, most likely. It's important, to the point we discussed, to be honest, to have high integrity. This goes for anything from raising capital to hiring people to selling a product to developing partnerships to negotiating a deal. All of these require that people believe you're operating in good faith, and that comes down to you having a fundamental basis of integrity on which you're building. Other factors, I think, a level of emotional stability and level-headedness are important. It's very intense. It can be very draining. You start losing the grip on other aspects of your life, like how much exercise you're getting in a week, how well you're sleeping, how well you're eating, how often you're seeing your friends or your partner. All of these other really important aspects of life are strained, sometimes to the breaking point, by the entrepreneurial pursuit. And I think the most successful entrepreneurs are actually the ones who balance that the best, the ones who get enough sleep, eat well, stay healthy, get exercise, continue to see and value their friendships and their families, because many of those factors are not only important in their own right, but also really enable you to be your most effective version of yourself in the entrepreneurial setting. And then, myriad other factors that I think everybody understands are important in any given endeavor. With biotech entrepreneurship in particular, a scientific focus is critical. These are science-based businesses. And at the end of the day, whether or not your company succeeds will come down to whether or not your technology works. So there's questions around selecting that technology in the first place, building it in the correct way, asking the right questions and testing those experimentally. All of this entails really deep scientific knowledge. And you don't need to know everything yourself. No individual has everything that they'll need in order to build a successful company. But you also need to recognize where those gaps are and recruit for them, whether that's hiring somebody, finding the right co-founder, getting the right advisors. That's all very important. I'd say when I look back on Nivien Therapeutics, overall, I feel like we did the right thing. We built the company in the right way. We did the best we could with the resources available. We did our best to present people with that fair bet when it came to the risks of what we were pursuing, but the huge impact we could have if it worked. One thing I would do differently is bring in a more experienced executive to work alongside myself and my co-founder, right there full-time in the lab with us in the office in our meetings, because we really came into it without the level of experience that I think is often necessary, especially when developing a therapeutic. So I think there's a moment where one might want to put aside their pride and say, I've got this, and say, here, let's bring in somebody who's really seen this before and can help us turn this into something really great. So I think that's another really important factor, is the people you get involved, the ways in which you interact with them, and how you identify which people are really going to bring value to the endeavor that you're pursuing.
Well, Nathaniel Brooks Horwitz, thank you so much for such an insightful, informative discussion here. I mean, really shed a lot of light on this situation, from having gone through it, and really helpful for listeners who are thinking about entrepreneurship, interested in what it looks like. You provided an excellent window for folks to look through, and an uplifting and inspirational talk as well, given the stakes that are involved and your personal story being so compelling. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It was great to be on.
And listeners, thanks for being with us on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you will be back next time for another episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.